And we are back with the third segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this third segment, we are going to be talking about JJ Redick calling out Doc Rivers after via First Take and via Awful and via First Take. So basically, I'm just going to pull up JJ Redick's stats right here just to give you guys a little bit of a history around JJ Redick and why he's been saying a lot of these things, why he's allowed to say these things about Doc. So he was a role player, but he was a very, very good sixth man of the year. He was a very good sixth man of the year candidate and was a very good sixth man for a lot of the teams that he played with. Now, while he was a sixth man, he did end up starting in a lot of his games around 2013, 2014 when he was playing for the Clippers. Now, he spent his time in Orlando where he developed his game into being known as a very lethal three-point shooter. He shot 41% from three in his career and 39% in Orlando. So with that in mind, he was a very valuable asset going into the NBA, especially around this time where the era of the three-point shot was starting to reach its peak. And around 2013, he was traded to Milwaukee for a few games, and then he was later sent to the Clippers, where he really took his stride and became one of the most lethal shooters in the NBA. And he had some of his best seasons were as a Clipper, and he ended up shooting 40% in just about every single season except for one with the LA Clippers from the three. And his best season with the Clippers was when he averaged 16 points on 48% from the field, 47% from three, and 88% from the free throw line. So obviously he was a very good asset for the Clippers, and he was on the same team that Doc Rivers was coaching because Doc Rivers, as I said previously on podcast, he started coaching the Clippers after he coached Boston. And with that in mind, we all know the history around the Clippers and blowing leads and losing in a bunch of series where they should have won, especially in the second round where they ended up blowing a 3-1 lead to the Houston Rockets. JJ Redick did play his part. He wasn't at fault for losing any of these games, but again, he was part of a very infamous roster that was very disappointing in the postseason. And with that in mind, with how the Bucks are performing right now, with Doc Rivers being 3-7 and whatnot, JJ Redick had some things to say about Doc Rivers and the situation. So he said, quote, "I've seen the trend for years. The trend is always making excuses. Doc, we get it. Taking over a team in the middle of the season is hard. It's always an excuse. It's always throwing your team under the bus. There's never accountability with that guy." End quote. So obviously not a lot of positive words coming from JJ Redick towards Doc Rivers. So obviously, having one of your former players say this about you is not good for your resume. And I said it previously, how on a previous podcast, how I believe that Doc Rivers was just throwing his team under the bus, the same way that he threw Ben Simmons under the bus. And I'm not entirely crazy for saying that and accusing him of that, because now JJ Redick is out here saying the exact same thing about how Doc Rivers just throws people under the bus. Obviously, this was a reference to how Doc Rivers was saying that some players on the team didn't know the play, and this was in response to his post-game comments. So I'm just going to pull up Doc Rivers' post-game comments right now, because he said this in the most recent loss about his team. Some teams were in a completely different state of mind, and if I just pull out the right quote with the Bucks, because they lost in shocking fashion to the Memphis Grizzlies, which they shouldn't have lost, and because, I remember the quote. He said that we had some players in Cabo or something like that, and obviously this was a shot at some of the players and their lack of attention. And while I understand, like, you can't entirely control your team and what plays they remember, you're also sort of like in that power to make them remember the plays. Like, you're the one that hosts the meetings, and if you know that the team struggle remembering a play, maybe, I don't know, review the play in the film room for a few times, run the play a few times. Like, apparently it's a very common trend with Doc Rivers to throw a bunch of players under the bus. And I mentioned that he's done it with Ben Simmons, so I'll go ahead and touch up on that. So previously, when he was the coach for the Sixers, Ben Simmons was their starting point guard for the time. The Sixers were the number 1 seed, and obviously they were one of the favorites to win the entire thing. And this was in 2021. So they go into the second round, they face the Hawks, and Ben Simmons, he just plays absolutely horrible. He plays so scared, and it's as if he doesn't want to participate at all in the offense. And he ends up passing up a wide open dunk over Trae Young. Like, it took me a while to say that, because I'm still, like, stunned at the fact that he really passed up an open dunk on Trae Young, a guy that's 6'2", 6'1", compared to his height being 6'10", and he passed it up. So obviously, a lot of the players weren't happy with this, Joel Embiid in particular, and Joel Embiid and Doc Rivers throw him under the bus immediately. And this angers Ben Simmons, causing him to not want to play for the Sixers anymore. I don't blame him, but at the same time, like, that's really weak. You should just play, because why don't you just go out there and prove to everyone that you are better than what they say? That's what if I had Ben Simmons' skills, that's what I would do. And he gets traded, so now that James Harden is on the Sixers, there's like barely any excuse. Joel Embiid also just won the MVP. There's no excuse. So the first year, this was when Joel Embiid was a runner-up to the MVP. They ended up losing with Harden. So obviously, like, Harden played really bad, and Doc Rivers, I mean, he didn't really do much to help the team. But at the same time, James Harden did play really bad. Then they went into the next season with Joel Embiid winning the MVP and playing the Boston Celtics, where they blew a 3-2 lead. So obviously, that's when they decided to cut the strings with Doc Rivers and fired him, because he just keeps blowing leads. This is constant with him, and he doesn't do anything to improve the team. He just throws them under the bus. I understand that the players have to make shots, but as a coach, you can't say that about your players on live TV. You can't say that. Like, you have to own up to the fact that there could have been things that maybe you could have done better, and the fact that you just say that the team needs we just need to work harder, and like we need to practice more, stuff like that. Like, you don't throw them completely under the bus. That's just not cool, in my personal opinion. But with that, we are out of time for the third segment, so tune in for the fourth segment, where we take a look at the NBA Power Rankings. Now, despite the fact that there haven't been any games that went down, the Power Rankings were still released, apparently, yesterday, and we didn't get to look at them yesterday, So we're going to look at them today right after this short break.